webinar. This, Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Women's Property Tax Association's June 17th, 2026 webinar, this hot topic of navigating incentives for new development. We have an accomplished panel with us today. We have attorney Katie Janke-Dale. Katie is a preeminent zoning and land use attorney in Chicago. Despite her young age, she is the managing partner of DLA Piper's Chicago office. Mallory Maluzzi is a partner at Klein Thorpe and Jenkins, where she represents taxing bodies in their property tax assessment and appeals. And Mary Kate Fitzgerald is with us today. She is a partner at Fitzgerald Law Group. She has over 20 years of experience in the field of property tax, including over 14 years of experience as an attorney in this area. These attorneys' paths have crossed many times throughout their careers. All three graduated from law school in 2011. Katie and Mallory are actually friends from law school and graduated together. All three of these attorneys have been involved in some of the most prominent cases in their respective fields, and we're grateful to have them with us today. The materials for today's program were emailed to you in the reminder Zoom email this morning. They will also be available in the chat for today's program. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please add them in the Q&A box, and they will be answered as we go down throughout the topics of today's program. Our program today has been approved for 1 hour of CLE credit. Please remember to complete the evaluation at the end of the program. You will have a pop-up at the end when we close the webinar where you can fill out the evaluation and enter your ARDC number. If you're unable to do that, you will get a reminder email later reminding you to complete the evaluation form. Please only complete that form one time. If you fill it out twice, it will mess with our CLE application. With that, I will turn it over to today's panelists. Thank you all for your time today.
Thanks for having us. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Kate Fitzgerald. I spent a lot of time working with the WPTA, and it's good to be back. What we put together today is a new way for you to think about the tax incentive process in Cook County. And we also have to tackle a little bit of zoning because it does go hand in hand in many cases. So we're going to get started. Let's just dive right into some zoning.
I'll jump in here. Hi, everyone. Katie Janke-Dale with DLA Piper. Mary Kate gets all the creative credit for pulling together the presentation today, and the way that we've kind of structured thinking about both zoning and the incentives program is through like a train metaphor. So the first stop that often runs hand in hand with the various incentive programs is zoning. On this slide, we summarize City of Chicago specific zoning considerations. So, it's important to find out from the client what they're planning on doing. And often we try to run the incentives parallel with zoning so that when we're working with the community, the city, or village, and other stakeholders, they kind of can get a full picture of the package and the development and what they're approving. So this can take many forms, and there's often different ways to get to the same destination. So if what your client is proposing isn't currently allowed by the zoning, you may have to go and get an administrative adjustment, which is, kind of as the name implies, administrative approval that gets processed by the zoning administrator, but oftentimes does require notice to abutting neighbors and/or the local alderman or city council member. It could require a special use permit that has to go first to the Department of Planning and Development and then ultimately to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a public hearing. In some municipalities, those also end up in front of the village board or the city council, depending on the form of government. It could be just a plan development, which is kind of in the city, it's its own kind of unique zoning designation for a specific property that, as the slide shows, goes to the Plan Commission and the City Council, or it could just be a rezoning or zoning map amendment, which is changing the zoning designation from maybe a residential designation to a commercial designation. That's probably actually what you would see the most in these incentive programs because, I guess except for the Affordable Housing Special Assessment Program. But the county classification programs are typically going to be seen in the commercial context. And as noted at the bottom of the slide, and this again very much varies by jurisdiction. In the city of Chicago, if you've read the newspaper anytime in the last decade, aldermanic prerogative is still very alive, very real. Other municipalities, it may not matter as much, and you just have to count votes and get a majority of the board. And then it's definitely a continuum. Some places it really doesn't matter who the local city council member is, or it may be all city council members serve kind of an at-large capacity. Evanston's a great example. The city council members don't strictly adhere to aldermanic prerogative, but they always want to hear from the local alderman. So it's really important to understand those local political considerations. Mallory, anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, I was going to go because I think the next slide talks a little bit about non-city of Chicago, and I think that's a big thing that Kay is saying. Like, city of Chicago has its own world and mechanisms and procedures, and it's very important to know them in order to navigate them, especially when you consider aldermanic prerogative. However, outside of city of Chicago and all of the other suburban Cook County communities, you really need to do your research into what the form of government is, meaning that there are forms of government where there are still wards, where there are city council members or trustees elected within a certain boundary area, or it might be where they're all elected at large, meaning that they represent everyone in the community and they're more looking at a community aspect versus different districts or wards within that community. You also need to know whether or not it's what type of government. Article 4, Article 3, is it a strong manager, meaning that staff is going to have a lot more impact and input versus if it's something that the board has a lot more impact or control. How involved is the village president or mayor? Are you going to need to meet with them versus just staff? And then getting into this, obviously knowing the different codes, looking up what their zoning is, the property you want to develop or purchase, what zoning district is it already in? So you can look at, again, as Katie was saying, do you need a map amendment to change the zoning? Is the use you're proposing allowed? Do you need a text amendment to include a new use? And then they usually, luckily, almost all of these codes are available on the village's website. Pretty easy to navigate, looking through their zoning code to figure out the process. If you're doing sort of a larger development, especially if you're doing a planned development or planned unit development, as they're sometimes called in the suburbs, they may have things like concept review that you go through. You kind of get initial feedback from the board staff and the board before it's even presented for public hearings. Another thing to know is that the process and different committees are different in communities. So some towns, maybe they have a combined plan commission and zoning board. So that entity hears all public hearings, whether it's a variation, a plan unit development, rezoning, special use, it's the same body. Some have them separate, and plan commission does certain duties, and zoning board does different duties. Some then also have like architectural review as you're going through the process, or different committees. So it's really important to know those, and also looking, it's going to have the same process of like going through a public hearing, but may have different elements. Also knowing whether or not the community, especially when you're talking about incentives, do they have an economic development or business development department or director? Because those individuals are usually the individuals you start talking to when you're looking for specific properties for development, but they're not the same staff who's going to put you through zoning. So they might be a dual role, but there are a lot of communities that it's separate, and they might have different parts. And so you really knowing who the people and the players are and you're talking to, and you might, the economic development director is all about getting you in there, getting development in there, maybe is on board with the incentive. We can talk about that. And then all of a sudden you're going to community development and they're like, well, here's all the code requirements and here's what you're going to have to do. And it may seem like, oh, what do you mean? All of a sudden you were all for it. And they just, depending on the community, they maybe don't talk to each other very well, or they just see their role as different. So it's going to be important to kind of know all that, reaching out, getting a lay of the land, it helps if you know, obviously, people in the community. There's, obviously, as Nicole said, Katie and I have known each other for years, so that we've done projects in communities that my firm represents. So, I may give her like, okay, this is just how the form of the government is. Here's here's your starting point. Here's the attorneys at our firm who work in that community, so you know kind of who to reach out to. She does that with other firms that she knows as well. So knowing that and being comfortable with that, if you can, is always a good start, good way to know.
One thing I'd add on this slide to be cognizant of is lobbyists, and this kind of applies to the zoning slide, or the zoning part of the presentation, but also the incentives. Knowing what the municipality's zone or lobbyist requirements are is really critical. The city of Chicago, for example, has a very, very broad definition. So I am a registered lobbyist, and for any matter for which I'm going to city council, for incentives or for zoning, I report those clients. A lot of jurisdictions, that's not the case. If you're a lawyer and practicing law, there's a carve out from the lobbyist requirements, but the definitions can be incredibly broad. And at least DLA's position for the many decades that we've been playing in this space is that we do fall within it. So being aware of those and the remedies, if you fail to follow the lobbyist requirements, can be invalidating the approval, either the zoning approval or the local support, which we'll get to when we turn to the incentives discussion.
Yeah, and one thing I would add that onto what Katie said earlier about running the tax incentive parallel to the zoning. Katie, would you agree that if you're going to go just one at a time, you should always do the zoning first?
Yeah, usually if they are going to not run concurrently, a lot of times the municipality wants that too, because they don't want to approve the incentive for a project that you can't pull building permit for because it's not properly zoned.
Exactly. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the lobbyist registration. I did include in here a handout from in the handouts today, a publication from the Chicago Board of Ethics. This really breaks down for you what the requirements are of the lobbyist registration and of the lobbyist ordinance, really. So I've cited a few things here. This has been a talked about issue with property tax lawyers. However, a lot of the property tax lawyers are still not registering as lobbyists when they're doing their tax incentive work. You are required to do so. Once you pass the threshold, which is you receive, $12.50 in fees or more than 20 hours, you are considered a lobbyist. You are not allowed, you are expressly prohibited from taking a contingent fee on those types of projects. And you have to file your quarterly reports. You have to be registered as a lobbyist. Yes, it's a little bit of extra legwork, but you should do it because the fines are very, very steep. You can get charged up to $1,000 per day since the day that you failed to register. Your client gets fined up to $20,000, and the city can cancel your tax incentive. So it's a very simple problem to avoid. Just make sure you register. Okay, so we're going to talk about incentives here, and most incentive applications are not successful, which is why this presentation is necessary. Only 14% of incentives have been approved over the last 5 years. 95% of renewals have been approved. So once you're in the system, you have a pretty good chance of surviving it. And then there's currently 5,400 PINs that are active, 5,485 that are active incentive PINs in Cook County. So it's your job to advise your clients how to help them have as smooth of a ride as possible. And so you need to know all of the requirements and where your client's project fits in, if they fit in at all. The other thing I would note is incentives are in no way something that your client is entitled to. So you have to be open to working with the municipality. You have to be open to extra requirements that they may have. And there can be a lot of bureaucratic hoops to jump through. So it just kind of matters whether it's worth it to your client or not. And you want to make sure that you know what those things are. We decided to look at this from the perspective of a rail service because I think a lot of what gets missed for property tax lawyers, and I know for myself, is focusing more on the class number and not enough on the different subsets of each class, and not really thinking about what the story is behind what you're applying for. So always think about the story behind what your tax incentive could be. Think about how you're getting there, and that's basically it. So there's 3 lines, 6 stations, and a few express trains, and we're going to talk about all of those. Just so you know, the method to getting there are the lines, the stops are the different classes. The fare is the benefit that your client is going to derive, and the timing of boarding is the application. So there's your key. So nearly everyone pays the same fare once you're in. You get the 10, meaning you get the same fare, right? So 10% for years 1 through 10, 15% for year 11, and 20% for year 12. Then there's the reversion to the standard 25% assessment level. And so an example of this would be if you have a $10 million industrial property, normally your assessed value is going to be 2.5 million. With the incentive, you get a 60% cut down to 1 million for 10 years. That's a huge benefit to your client. There was recently in April, there was an ordinance amendment passed 260936, and this does change some of the landscape in Cook County. The other thing I want to note really quick is that all of these tax incentives are derived from Cook County ordinances. So everything that we're talking about under this section is directly from the Cook County ordinances. Once we get into the affordable housing, that's a state benefit. So the 260936 Cook County ordinances control 7A is being merged into 7B. The 7B authorized officer letter is no longer a thing. 8 micro has a second qualification field through the EDGE Act, and there's new resolution requirements. So if you have an active incentive right now, you want to make sure that you get that into the resolution. Those are the prevailing wage affidavit that you have submitted it to the municipality. And on that prevailing wage affidavit, you have to state that you're going to comply or you have complied with the prevailing wage ordinance. Additionally, you have to state whether or not there's an RDA, and if there is an RDA, you have to attach it to the resolution. So make sure that those things are in there before, otherwise you're going to have to go back to the municipality and have them amend it.
And we have been seeing Cook County push back on resolutions lately, both with these requirements if they haven't been caught up, or if there wasn't enough detail about special circumstances, for example, or one of the other elements that aren't laid out in detail enough in the resolution. And generally, if you had the municipality agreeable in the first place, then they're going to be fine with amending it, but it just takes longer and, isn't as clean.
Yep. And then the Class 6B and 7C application timing also changed. It used to be that you had to submit these prior to the commencement of construction or substantial rehabilitation. Now it's within 1 year. So for 6B and 7C, you can file even after you've started construction, which is pretty great. And then the affidavit waiver has been extended through 2026. So we're not back up at the plate until 2027 on those. And I'm sure that they'll extend it, hopefully, again. Okay, so the first line is the new construction line. So this is when you're building something new, and it applies to everything except for landmark. So we'll get into why later. So 6B, 7B, 7C, 7D, and 8 are all eligible for those incentive classes through new construction. Okay, so and again, when you have to submit before, generally, the rule was always before construction commences. Now for 6B and 7C, you can do within 1 year. Substantial rehabilitation. So this is where you're saving something old. So you're taking a property and you are putting a ton of money into it and a ton of work into it, and you are making it better. This really only applies to the value added by the rehab. So you have to see an actual increase in the market value, and that it does apply to the value added, and it will apply to the land in a prorated portion compared to the value add. So that is, or to square footage add if you're doing an addition. So the exception to this is landmark, where you can, if the property was vacant for more than 2 years, you can have it applied to the land as a whole. it seems to be a method that was used a little bit more than it is now, and I think a lot of that is because it's not as great of a benefit. So you're going to see a lot more of these incentives under new construction or reoccupation than you are under substantial rehabilitation. Reoccupation is you're rescuing something abandoned, and this is probably the strictest standard time in terms of when you have to apply. You have to apply before the reoccupation begins. There is no exception to that. There really is no exception to that if you're going strictly on this line. You want to have at least 12 months of vacancy and an arm's length purchase for value before it's eligible for the incentive. So, that is something to always pay attention to. Make sure you get that application in before it starts, before they occupy. And then we have special circumstances. So if you have vacancy for under 12 months and or no purchase for value, then you can apply for special circumstances. Mallory, do you want to chime in on what some of those special circumstances might be that
Yeah, so a lot of it might be it's pretty close, the amount of value going into special circumstances. Trying to pull up some of our examples that we've approved special circumstances for.
relocation of
Relocation of like a
company
business.
to bring a bunch of jobs?
Yes, jobs are a huge thing for special circumstances.
Yeah.
So you'd have to kind of talk to the municipality because they have to definitely build that into
Exactly.
and spell it out in the resolution.
Sure.
Trying to see if I can see some examples that we've seen. Sorry, I didn't have they got shut down. I'll come back when we kind of come back to it really quick.
Sure.
I'll jump in.
Okay. So there's big interchanges. You can see 6B, 7B, and 8 all have a lot of symmetry. So in terms of how you can apply for their programs. In addition to this, 6B and Class 8 also have symmetry in the SERM Express. That's something separate, which we'll get into. So let's see. Substantial rehab is the only avenue that you can get to landmark by. The reason being, landmark is taking an old building that is a certified landmark and having it go through the whole process. You have to be spending at least 50% of the building's full market value. It has to be registered with the Preservation Commission, and it's not a super easy go. I know a lot of people think, well, we'll just have. I've had clients say to me, "Well, we'll just have it certified as a landmark," and it's like, okay, well, what's unique? In that case, you might want to hire a landmark consultant. They do exist, and they can give you an analysis before your client starts spending money. Katie, do you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Yeah, and I also realized we forgot to mention at the beginning, we are going to be answering questions. At the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A box. And feel free, as we're going through this, to put your questions in there, and we'll either answer them or fold it into our presentation or come back at the end. But yeah, Class L, we've seen pretty active. So in the city, you can either do it as a designated landmark, so like a one-off building, or if you're a contributing building in a landmark district. So two examples of that is it wasn't a landmark when we first started working on that with the client. Then they hired the consultant, like Mary Kate mentioned, who dug into the archives, confirmed that it met the criteria to be designated. So we had to go through initially the designation process to make the building itself a landmark and then get the Class L approved. And oftentimes you're working with historic preservation staff. They're very closely reviewing the project scope and making recommendations about what work should be eligible and ineligible. And then on the other avenue is if you're a contributing building in a landmark district. So Fulton Market was designated as a landmark district, and you've seen a lot of projects over there take advantage of the Class L designation, former meatpacking facilities that clients have converted to, 900 West Randolph is a good example of that. Just realized that both my examples are on Randolph. But that's the whole block that, is all commercial retail and restaurants that was developed by Tucker Development. So I think that unlocked a ton of value in that neighborhood, which has been one of the hottest neighborhoods for development across the entire country, and allowed a lot of those buildings to be saved that otherwise would make no sense financially without the incentive.
Right. So now we're going to get into SERM and SIR. These are the emergency departures. SERM skips the 12-month vacancy station, and you are eligible after only 3 months. You don't need a purchase for value, but you have to employ 250 jobs at 250 employees at 30 plus hours a week. This will give you one run at this. It is not renewable. SIR is the life support for a 10-year resident facing hardship. So you have to have that client must have be at that property for 10 years plus, and then there's been no transfer. With that, we'll get into the requirements a little bit later, but these are two different vehicles. So SERM does apply under 6B and 8, and SIR only applies to 6B. So this is only for industrial on the SIR front. With micro, so this is a new one, fairly new. This is Class 8 micro. It is a 30-year incentive, and it was really enacted back when quantum became a thing. So there had been some legislation that passed on Springfield, and then Cook County added on to that and making the U.S. Steel site a suitable place for the quantum computing development to go. And it's a huge benefit. It's 30 years long. It is not transferable, it is transferable, but there's all sorts of provisions of you have to notify within 90 days, et cetera. We can get into that a little bit more, but it's a unique incentive. They are expanding it. They just expanded it to include the parties to the people that qualify via the EDGE Act. So, and then the two extra ones are E and C. There's no transfers needed. We have the Shuttle E is the solar thing, which you just directly apply at the assessor. There's no resolution. It's just a 20% level of assessment for 10 years on the solar portion of your property. And then C, which is remediation. And this is triggered by your no further remediation needed letter from the IEPA. And it does, so it covers the land as well as the building. So as I noted earlier, the 7A was discontinued as of June 1st, and it's now been put into 7B. So all 7As are supposed to be handled under the 7B channel. The $2 million minimum investment of 7B is no longer required. So that's something interesting. Now we're going to get into all the service advisories for each of these classes and stops. For 6B, you can all kind of read this stuff, but the big thing is note that if you're doing substantial rehab, it applies only to the value add by the rehab plus the qualified land. So, you have all these different ways to get there. You can do new construction, substantial rehabilitation, reoccupation, or special circumstances. And I would say in a lot of ways, you might be better off going in under special circumstances, if possible, than substantial rehabilitation. But you've got to be able to make that case. So know the qualifications of each of these and go from there. This does require municipal or county approval for a 6B. You do not have to go. You don't have to have approval from both unless it's SERM or special circumstances. So you will need county approval if you're doing special circumstances, but it may be worth it.
Mary
Yeah,
Kate,
and I can jump in
any
this.
new industrial in Cook County that works without a 6B? I don't think I've seen any in
I'm
recent
sorry?
years. I was just curious, have you seen any new construction industrial project in Cook County without a 7 or a 6B?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
And it's construction. It's usually because the client wasn't aware of the incentive, and
Mhm.
and now you may be able to get them that incentive because of the change in the ordinance. So that's something they're kind of Yeah, but there's been a few. I would say it's not very often that has been happening in recent years. I think you're absolutely right.
We've had some that haven't gotten the incentives for new industrial. We see it a lot on rehab, like substantial rehabs or reoccupations. But jumping onto the special circumstances, I did find my list. Sorry, I had misplaced it of some of them. So some might be like maybe it's been abandoned for a long time, but the property owner isn't changed. So that, but it's been more than the 12 months that they haven't had a tenant, reinvesting into a derelict area, readaptive uses, deferred maintenance, um, you know, uh, all those type of things that can boost it, especially if that community wants that property to be redeveloped or substantially uh, rehabbed. They will help you find special circumstances.
Yeah. And the nice thing about the 6B is there's unlimited renewals. So, but again, when you're going up to renew, you have to go through the whole process all over. And I think a lot of clients and a lot of attorneys forget to advise their clients that you have to be doing stuff. You need to be continuing to invest in the property and in your business that you're running there while in that in between period, right? During the incentive period, because the idea is they're giving you this tax incentive so that you can do that. So I think you're going to see a lot more pushback in these renewals and we're starting to see that where there's just not much being done and property owners are starting to think that they have this incentive as of right. Explain to your clients that this is not as of right and that you're going to have to continue to do things. You're going to have to jump through hoops. Um, and you certainly have to comply with all of the requirements. But then at the municipal level, they may have some additional requirements. We'd like you to do X, Y, Z. We'd like, and you see that a lot at the city of Chicago through EDAC, or I'm sorry, through DPD. All of these incentives run through DPD. So, Katie, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that and this varies also by municipality. So in some jurisdictions, to get the local approval, it's, they like the project, they want to see the investment, they approve it. In the city of Chicago, I actually think for all these incentive programs, the heavy lifting all happens at the local level. But maybe Mary Kate will disagree with me because once I get through the city process, I hand it off to her. But
I think you're
so
right.
maybe you'll correct me there. But DPD in the city takes a very close look at all of these incentives, and they oftentimes our clients will hire consultants who will run projections and help them kind of craft the argument, even though it's not always a requirement, but for the incentive, the project wouldn't go forward. Some do have that as a requirement, others don't. In the city, they require it for any of them. So, and they really do poke at the numbers and dig through your budget, and you have to be comfortable with going open book with them. And so that's another thing to just kind of advise clients on. Like I said, other places that we work on these, it just kind of flows along with the zoning. They like the project, they approve the resolution kind of in conjunction with it. But in others, like the city, they really do take a very close look at the project before they put their stamp on it.
Yeah.
And I
And they
think you're
do.
going to be getting more pushback or looking into it when you get to a renewal, because I could see a lot of communities being open to um, having a giving the tax incentive with the idea that, okay, we're helping you come into town, and then it will revert back to the normal amount once this long 12-year period ends. And so to be asking for another renewal, that you are gonna is likely to see pushback and proof that we need it, because then it almost, from a local perspective, starts feeling you're going to get on, fairness pushbacks potentially, and
Yeah.
needing to show that you still need that.
And I think also something to keep in mind, at least at the city level, when you're doing these incentives, you go through DPD, they do a background check on the applicants and anybody affiliated with the applicants. And so a lot of the time, you're going to have unpaid parking tickets, unpaid any kind of ticket coming back up. So, and DPD is not going to give its stamp of approval, and it's not going to make it to the proper committee or to the city council until you've paid all those tickets have all been paid. And that's something that, Katie, when did they start doing that?
Wait, doing what?
The background checks and the tickets for unpaid
Um,
tickets?
they've done it as long as I've known.
Okay.
Anytime they're giving either money or an incentive, um, yeah, they've been doing it as long as I've been
Okay.
practicing.
Okay. So, because it seems like I guess maybe it just recently came up for me. So that was something that I dealt with.
And
Yeah.
we do have a couple questions. I'm going to throw them in. One was about confirming the change about when to file for Class 8 tax incentives. Do they need to be filed before construction starts still, or
Yes, they do.
yeah, okay.
And the reason for that is there's a pretty strict but for clause in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we have another one regarding kind of tax appeals. I don't know if we want to get to that now or talk about the strategy when it comes to like income approach and taxing officials relying on that 10% while doing a income load and set and
So the
calculating the
load
tax
would
load
be
versus 25%.
so the load should be a 10%. It should be based on a 10% level of assessment with an incentive. Um, does that answer the question?
Yeah, the question is what is the what should be used for calculating the tax load because the
What
concern was that it reduces the value of the incentive because increases the market value using the 10%.
Yes, that is absolutely true. But the other side of that is an incentive would increase the value of the market value of a property. It's more marketable. You've got lower taxes. There's more willing buyers for something like that. It's kind of a desired asset. So absolutely the load and the way that the Board of Review treats it is they use that 10% level of assessment in calculating the load.
Yep. And then we did a question about whether the prevailing wage affidavit applies to renewals,
Prevailing.
like the
Oh,
requirement to have pay prevailing wage.
yes, it does because
Yes.
you're going to
Yeah.
need that resolution. Yep,
Yeah. It's part of any resolution now that you have to pay prevailing wage if you're going to keep the incentive,
exactly.
whether you get a new one or you're trying to keep the current one.
Exactly. So 7B commercial, I'm going to kind of glaze through these. You can read them at your, ask any questions you want to, but you can you can read the requirements on your own time. You don't need me to walk you through it all. The one thing I would say about 7B is that 7A is now being merged into it. So anything you're going to apply on a 7A, apply under a 7B. And that's basically, this is commercial, really commercial only. Um, okay, we can go on a cure. So 7C cure, this is the short term and it's probably got the least stringent requirements. It's a 3-year reduction to 10% and then 15 and 20 and then back to 25 unless you renew it and you're eligible for one renewal only. This is something that you use when you can't make something else work, I would say. There's really not as stringent requirements. If you can't prove that there's stagnant or decreasing tax in the 3 of the last 6 years, then you're probably, there's a pretty baseline requirement for an incentive. So this would be something where you are trying to get an incentive for the property, make sure your client understands this is very temporary. This is very, very temporary. 7D grocery food store desert. This is a 10-year reduction. You're allowed to also have that renewal. And this is strictly for grocery stores, so it's in food deserts. So this is not a very commonly used incentive. It just came into fruition probably 3 years ago. Fairly new. I'm not sure. I don't have any data on how many of these are actually active. It's a good idea. I don't know if how effective it's been. The Class 8 revitalization. So applies to both commercial and industrial. And this is something you always want to think of if your client's property is in Bloom, Bremen, Calumet, Rich, or Thornton. And then it's super dependent on the certified revitalization area. or the tax reactivation product or the enterprise areas, or if you're in one of those 5 townships. So if your client's in one of those 5 townships, think of this automatically. It could be a good way for you to get them an incentive. And then the landmark designation is, we spoke about this earlier, and it only applies to the building unless it was vacant for over 2 years. Do either of you have anything else to add?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Nope.
The special circumstances branch, we've talked about this, kind of beat this one to a pulp. The most common derailment is that the resolution is passed and the tenant moves in before you've applied, or the resolution is passed, the tenant moves in, and the validation is still pending. So basically, you want to make sure that you've applied that you need to apply to the assessor's office no matter what. A number of these do require that you have the resolution before you apply and or a letter. So I think a lot of lawyers tend to go for the resolution and then forget about the assessor application, and that's deeply problematic and may account for why we have that 14% success rate. 6B and 8 Serum. This is, for Serum, you're looking at really big employers where they've got 250 plus jobs, and it's less than 3 months of continuous vacancy. I don't have any real world examples of this because I can't really think of a situation where somebody with 250 jobs would just go dark for 3 months and then all of a sudden light back up. But maybe I don't know. 6B, Sir Local. So this is just strictly sustainable emergency relief, and it's intended to be one time only. Make sure your client understands that. I've had many, many clients, new clients come in whose previous attorneys didn't advise them that the 6B Sir they were getting them was not renewable. And so they haven't budgeted for it. It's going to create major capital problems for them. And I think that this is a major area that we can all do better on. Make sure your clients understand one time only, no renewals.
And we've seen this a lot with expansions. So some of the ones I've seen is like people are just looking to try to do an expansion. And so they just need that little bit of a gap coverage. And then they are expecting, once production kicks up with this expansion, that they'll be able to continue their tax,
Exactly.
the benefit. So I'm just thinking of one that I recently did. That was a big component of it.
So the Micro Express, Katie, this is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so like Mary Kate said, but this was put into place really around the Quantum Shore development down on the former US Steel site. Was that project had a lot of excitement both at the state and county and city level, but just didn't work with the 12-year incentive or one of the other programs. So they passed legislation to create this new micro program. That certainly is going to be utilized on that site, I'm sure, as well as elsewhere throughout the state.
Okay.
But it very much tracks with micro and quantum computing uses, so it's pretty narrowly tailored, I would say.
Okay.
Does the micro program apply to data centers, Katie?
I don't believe it does, but Mary Kate, do you know?
No, from my understanding, it does not. So there are some data centers that have different incentive classes. There's been a lot of pushback on including data centers as incentives. There have been a few recent 6Bs, and there are plenty of existing 6Bs. The complaint that we see both at the municipal level and at the county levels that a data center is not really industrial. I disagree with that. I think that this is the modern factory is the data center, and it is necessary to support all of our other infrastructure. So I mean, there's an argument to be made either way. Incentives are not really, they don't want nobody right now. Okay, data centers are just unpopular right now, right? Everybody hates them. They pollute everything. But yet everybody wants to use AI. So there's got to be some sort of a solution here so that we can get what we need and we have everything
We have done at least a couple 6Bs for data centers though,
Mhm.
so that could be an option if there's support. And it's like to
Yes,
your point, aside from the politics, they don't create a lot of jobs, and a lot of times
right.
jobs are driving these incentives as well.
So, and I would, and the thing I argued was that there's the peripheral creation of jobs because of the data centers. So
Mhm.
while there's not a lot of jobs created on site, there are a lot of peripheral jobs created
Yeah,
at other sites. I don't know.
and temporary jobs in
Exactly.
construction.
Yes. Lots of temporary jobs on those. So, and they absolutely always pay prevailing wage to the construction workers. That's never a question. So it can fit into the 6Bs. There are plenty of them, but there is some resistance right now. Um, the Shuttle E Solar. This is just to get you a 20% level of assessment. If you put solar panels on your building, you get a credit for 50% of the improvement area that the solar panels are on top of. So if you put solar panels all across the roof of your flat roofed property, and then you can get 50% of that treated as 20%. So it's a major weird blended level of assessment classification. And you have to be able to prove and file annual reports that you're generating electricity that's being consumed offsite. So it's not a super popular thing. I think the attention was good, but I haven't seen it play out very much. Shuttle C, this is remediation of a contaminated property. And this is totally renewable for industrial riders, but not for commercial. So you have within 1 year of the no further remediation letter to get this thing filed and get the application filed. So you should definitely do that if your property has any sort of contamination. It's an easy way to get into the incentive, especially if you're industrial. Um,
Really quickly before we move to
yep.
residential, I know we talked about the redevelopment agreements earlier with the new changes, but one thing that I've seen clients be unaware of and then get caught off guard with are what goes into those redevelopment agreements.
Mhm.
Specifically, often they have job covenants, and then um, they often have minority and women-owned business enterprise requirements. So the city, that's 26% MB, 6% WB, and the city requires you to report and work through their compliance department. That does add, typically it adds to the project cost. And so making sure that your client's aware of that. I've definitely had clients go to pull permits and learn the hard way because they just weren't aware of it. So I've started flagging it right at the get-go. If you're in the city of Chicago, they need to bake that into their budget and their construction plan.
And
Exactly.
that might be, again, depending on outside the city of Chicago, depending on how much the municipality wants this development or doesn't, may be having incentive agreements that usually have job components. If it's a commercial one, they may have a certain component receiving certain taxes, whether that's food and beverage taxes. So that can implicate, the long run as tenancy changes, being aware of that, and they will and can revoke their consent for classification if they're not meeting the requirements. Um, there's a lot of components in there when you have these, because as that you need to just be aware of, and it's a negotiation. We've been seeing them. I've had a couple of spec industrial recently go through, and we aren't issuing the resolution right away until they actually get a tenant in there that meets code requirements um and the needs of that, and then so that's when the incentive will more kick in. uh Construction requirements of how quickly it has to be constructed, all these different things might go into a redevelopment agreement or incentive agreement. There may be negotiations on ability to appeal their tax bills, given that they're already getting that reduction, that they're, it's kind of similar to like a TIF agreement or RDA under a TIF, where those come into play. The community could do it, not all, but you just kind of need to be aware that some may negotiate more aggressively than others, and have different concerns. So just because it wasn't required in one community doesn't mean it might not be required in a different one.
Exactly. And I think two things are really important to note. The WBE and MBE requirements, there are also consultants for that. to help you get through your project. Now, a lot of the time, the general contractor, especially in the city of Chicago, are very familiar with this and they know how to help your client fulfill those requirements. But a lot of the city council, somebody put a great foot forward first and started using a WBE MBE consultant. And so now it's kind of become the norm for these bigger projects. I think the biggest thing to do as a property tax lawyer, since that is most of our audience, is to know your limits, know when it's time for you to get, when you might be in a little bit in over your head and you have a complex RDA or you have a complex project and you need somebody that has a little bit more experience with navigating the city of Chicago with the DPD and all the different channels there. That's when you call your zoning lawyer. You know, that's where you got to get somebody involved. And it's okay to say like, hey, this is a not really, because once the RDA once you have an RDA involved, I do think that it becomes more of a zoning issue than a property tax issue. So somebody very smart once told me stay in your lane. And I think that that is a really good way to operate is by staying in your lane. So hopefully, that's a good takeaway from today. And if you're not going to stay in your lane and you're going to continue to do tax incentives, make sure that you register as a lobbyist in the city of Chicago. We can move on. The residential division. So this is all your affordable housing programs. There's a tier 15, tier 35, and the low affordability community regional thing. We're going to go through this very quickly. There's been so many presentations on this. You basically all know it. And this comes from the state. It's the 35 ILCS. It's all on the front. 35 ILCS 215-178. This has been around since 2022. Katie, is that right?
I think that's right.
At 22. So we have, all these, basically, it's dependent on how much of your property is going to be affordable housing for tier 15 and tier 35. And then when you get into low affordability community, it depends more on geography, PLAs, and everything else. If you are going on an LAC, if you're doing tier 15 or tier 35, it's really easy for a property tax lawyer to handle that. If you're going the LAC route, and you have to have a designation of the area as an LIC, you absolutely need a zoning attorney. There is a lot involved in having that designation done. And so if you don't meet the requirements geographically automatically and you have to have that done, call a zoning lawyer. And the LAC is obviously an unbelievable benefit. I mean, I was looking at one property where it was a large $150 million build, and their tax bill, their AV was lower than the AV on my house and it was downtown, so it was, and I do not have a big house. So it was pretty crazy that's what we're seeing is these super, super low AVs coming out of the LIC program at least for the first 3 years. Huge benefit, definitely worth exploring for your client. And the deeper the affordability, the deeper the cut. And you are okay, so a $10 million apartment building at the 10% residential level, you've got a 1% assessed value. The tier 15 cuts that to 750 and tier 35 cuts it to 650. And you can renew this 2 times. So this is basically virtually doing nothing other than fulfilling the requirements from the city for that tier 15, and you're going to automatically get a cut. So if you have a client that's doing a new residential build in the city of Chicago, make sure, or anywhere where affordable housing is required, make sure that you look into this, see if they're eligible in this area and apply for it. Mallory, are you dealing with this a lot?
I have not been dealing with this too much, but it may be getting more out of my lane the more we deal too much into economic development and stuff like that.
Katie, do you have anything?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this was a huge benefit to the state when they passed that. And notably, and that's how Mary Kate and I first met, I think, was when we had to go back and fix the LAC base year definition. So that's why I hesitated on what year it was, because at first it was passed, no one could actually figure out how to underwrite it, and so it had to be amended. But I don't work on any residential project that isn't where this isn't involved. But every residential project I work on, almost across the board, does have an affordable requirement. So, but it really has unlocked every project that otherwise didn't underwrite.
And I think for the record, it was The way that the original statute passed, I think Katie and I both would have preferred to rewrite the entire thing, but we were told one change only, and so that's what we helped do. The LIC program had absolutely no teeth before then, like Katie was saying. Um, so the entry platform is just you've got to have need to know the 60% AMI requirements and how that works. 15 to 34%, you're at the tier 15 or yeah. So I mean, you can read through it all.
Yeah, well, because we're about 1 o'clock right now, Mary
Yeah,
Kate, because I know you
exactly.
can't see.
Okay.
Okay, so I didn't know if you wanted to talk about the pending bills.
Yes, exactly. So I do want to say this though, make sure that you pay attention to when you have to file your applications on this. Part one, tier 15, tier 35, put your application in before the asset is put into service. LAC, you want to do it before the commencement of the construction. That also goes to the PLA that you're going to need, et cetera, et cetera. Part two is after lease up. So we can skip the rest of this. And then there are some potential tax and state incentives that are pending right now. And this is really geared towards keeping the bears in Illinois. HB 910 passed the House, but not the Senate. So it seems like that one is probably dead. So now we have HB 5797, which was just introduced 2 days ago. This is, you should all look into what this means for the bears so that you understand it. But this one is much more narrowly tailored just to the bears. So I think it's probably a lot more palatable to people as a whole. It requires a major investment up front. And it does require a individual negotiations with all the taxing bodies. So Mallory's going to be very busy if this happens. So, and that's the whole thing is that the first time HB 910 kind of came into fruition, it was the first time we've really considered consulting with the taxing bodies more. You know, the taxing bodies are automatically notified of any exemptions. Mallory, do you want to talk about that?
Sorry, I was reading a question that just came in. Can you repeat
Yeah,
what you
so
want?
HB 910, this is the first time that you guys are taxing bodies are always notified of an exemption, right? But you're not notified
Yes.
of any tax incentives.
Unless they require a municipal resolution. So yeah,
Right.
so
But
all
like
of
the
these.
school districts and everything aren't notified.
Oh yeah, school districts are not notified. No,
Right.
they're not. It is only the municipality is notified, obviously, because you have to get their approval and support. But the other school districts are not notified of an incentive. They are notified of an exemption, though not all taxing bodies have to be notified of an exemption. It's
Right.
weird. They only carve out a couple of them. So yeah, this would be the first time to notify of an incentive.
Yeah, and I think that kind of begs the question. I think we're probably going to be seeing more of this, some changes to the regular incentive programs where they're probably going to be pushing to have the taxing bodies involved more. So, and just to have that approval because it does shift that burden. And that's something that the taxing bodies need to be aware of because sometimes you're shifting it to a less reliable source, less reliable payers. And so in a low collection rate area, they may not want to allow it as much, but
Yeah.
um,
We did get one additional question regarding data centers. Whether or not they're industrial, how do you reconcile this with the definition of real estate used for industrial purposes under the Cook County ordinance, the classification ordinance, that means any real estate used primarily for manufacturing, extraction, or processing of raw materials unserviceable in their natural state to create new physical products or materials, or in the processing of materials for recycling, transportation, or storage of raw materials and or finished physical goods in the wholesale distribution of such materials or goods for sale or lease. Data centers accommodate connectivity and generate power. They're not used for processing raw materials or creating new physical products.
I categorically disagree. The raw materials are the data that is being stored. And that data is being used for the manufacture of all sorts of other things. Just because it doesn't fit into the traditional sense of what a raw material is, does not mean that the data that is stored, processed, etc., in those data centers is not industrial. So it is absolutely an industrial entity, and I do have a friend that I'm pretty sure asked this question, and we've sparred on this issue quite a bit. I I disagree with you, but it's going to be okay. So, all right.
Anything else you wanted to add there, Katie?
No, it's just I appreciate a good sparring.
So, do you guys agree? Do you agree with me that it's industrial, or do you think it's not?
I think that you have to make that argument. I haven't thought of it too detailed. It obviously does not meet, I would say, would not necessarily meet the intent of the original intent of what we defined industrial as. That being said, the idea of it being still kind of like a raw material I'd have to, I think an argument can be made. I think we're getting into creative statutory interpretation. Not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying you're having to do, are you being more of a textualist, or are you going to be,
Contextualist.
yeah, or more into, being able to adapt a definition to new technology?
Katie, how about you?
Well, like I said, I handled one for a data center, so you know where I fall on the line.
All right. So I think that concludes everything today.
Thank you so much to our presenters, Katie, Mary Kate, and Mallory. We really appreciate your time. This was a very interesting and informative presentation. Thank you to everyone who provided questions. I think that added a lot of nice layers to the program. Remember, there will be an evaluation at the end of the program. It will pop up when we close the webinar. Please fill it out and enter your ARDC number. Save the date for our next program, which you will be getting an email for relatively soon. Cracking the Code, How to Read a Legal Description with Gina Mattison and Leah Kovtunenko. You will be receiving that soon. And our annual Women's Property Tax Association cocktail party is July 23rd on the rooftop of the Godfrey, and I hope to see all of you there. Thank you again. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right,
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.